Welcome everyone to a Good Vibes Gaming discussion, one we've been talking about for quite a while. It's finally time for us to give our spoiler-filled thoughts on Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity. But before we actually begin, what did all of us think about the game going into it? And Steve, why don't you start? I did the review. People know my thoughts on it. Steve, You take it away because you actually beat it first out of all of us.
Yeah,
right.
Which is like the weirdest turn of events. But it just so happened it came out at like a perfect time for me. I was getting married. I had time off. You know, I took a day or two off of GVG. So I just dove into the game and I have mixed feelings on it. From a which we'll break down in more detail later, but from a narrative perspective, I found Age of Calamity to be kind of disappointing. Mechanically, you know, it felt really good. The more I had to tell myself, like, okay, this is Breath of the Wild, but it also isn't. It's its own thing. And because the first couple missions, and I know if you've watched TNT, you know that the demo didn't really grab me. I didn't really enjoy the demo. But once I got into the game proper, I started to enjoy it more and more for what it is rather than what it isn't. And, you know, once I realized that this kind of had its own unique ebb and flow to the combat system, like I couldn't expect it to control exactly the same way I remember Breath of the Wild, but there's just enough similarity there to make it really, really engaging. And but I would say the thing that I liked most about it was the things that it let me do that Breath of the Wild didn't. And of course, that means I'm talking about playing as Mipha, playing as Urbosa.
Right.
You know, all the characters that I love from Breath of the Wild that I got to be in closer contact with as a result of this game coming out. So that is easily my favorite thing. Overall, I think it's a really solid game as long as you don't hang yourself up on the narrative too much.
Mm-hmm. Well, because I already gave my score, like what would you have scored? Just to get that out of the way right now so people kind of know where you're coming from.
So I think that with none of the technical issues, like, because there are technical issues with this game, so I'm just going to put that out there. If it didn't have those, it would be great vibes. But because they still exist even now, I would have to drop it down to good because they're just distracting enough to take me out of the game from time to time.
Okay. What about you, Ash?
For me, this kind of ended up being one of the biggest surprises of the year. I'm not a big Musou fan. I appreciate the series from a distance, and I liked the original Hyrule Warriors enough, but I didn't love it by any means. And I enjoyed Fire Emblem Warriors, but again, didn't love it. Age of Calamity, man, once this game got its hooks in me, it was really hard for me to put it down until I had finished it. And I think a lot of that has to do with how streamlined the experience is compared to other Warriors games that I've played. It's games like the original Hyrule Warriors, you have all those adventure maps and all the bloat, and it's like hundreds of hours of content. And no matter how much you play, it feels like you never make any inroads toward 100%ing it. But this game, I love the loop. I love that, like, it's very clear what materials you're getting in any given stage, what materials you need to finish certain quests. It never feels like 100% is too far out of reach, and that made it a lot harder for me to put down. But that is all separate from the fact that despite its technical issues, which there are many of them for sure, this gave me the chance to experience the part of Breath of the Wild that I didn't get to in Breath of the Wild, and you kind of alluded to that, Steve. You know, I've gone on record saying that I think Breath of the Wild has pretty crappy storytelling, and just not a very engaging narrative in general. And I still believe that. But that's not because the characters sucked. That's not because the events themselves aren't interesting. It's because all the cool stuff with all the cool people happened 100 years ago when you're playing Breath of the Wild. This game lets you experience those events and lets you get more time with all these really cool characters and play as them. Specifically, as you were saying, Steve, Mipha and Urbosa. So,
they're the best.
Yeah, exactly. And it felt, even though obviously there were many elements in the game that were contrived in order to allow this to be a big crossover, in the sense that it is a Hyrule Warriors game, it didn't feel as contrived as something like OG Hyrule Warriors, where there was just all sort of timeline convergence nonsense going on, just so you could have,
but
Tetra
that was the whole fun
hanging out
of it. It was
with
just because of the
Rudo and
excuse and to get all this wild stuff.
There is one thing I want to...
Oh, no, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. Okay, there's one thing I want to say while you're comparing it to OG Hyrule Warriors, and it is one of my higher praises for the game, and that is that the Koei Tecmo original characters in this game actually feel like they belong in this game's version of Hyrule, whereas the original characters in the OG Hyrule Warriors look like they're ripped out of Dead or Alive or some other Koei Tecmo property and just dumped in. So I really appreciate that, like, all the brand new characters actually make sense. Which I can't say that at all for the what was it? Except for Linkle. Linkle made sense.
Linkle works.
But she did,
what was her name? Like Sia or whatever?
Sia,
yeah. Where the hell was she from?
Sia was ridiculous. I'll give like Lana a pass. Like, I know she does look like she was pulled out of a Dead or Alive game, but not to the extent where I felt like she didn't belong. Lana I actually always quite enjoyed, but I thought Sia was ridiculous and clashed with everything else in that game. But yeah, it's funny you mentioned the original characters in AOC, because I agree they seem like they fit more in the established world, but I gotta say I thought Astor was one of the low points of the game. Like, for someone who was teased prior in trailers to be like, oh man, who is that? Is it the Breath of the Wild version of Vati, or is it just some original character? Are they going to tie into Breath of the Wild 2? Oh my god, no, he's just some generic wizard villain dude who has no bearing on anything.
He's a vessel to be possessed.
Yeah, exactly. So that was disappointing, but I think one of the greatest things I can say for Age of Calamity is that it feels organically like a Breath of the Wild game. Like, Koei Tecmo, obviously Nintendo worked alongside them on the cutscenes and the visual direction to make sure it really sold it. But it really, the graphics, for as problematic as the performance is, the visuals themselves look great most of the time, I think. It looks like you're playing Breath of the Wild a lot of the time. Obviously with a lot more concessions made technically to account for all the enemies on screen and stuff. But it feels like it's in Breath of the Wild's world with the art style and the character design, and I really love that about it.
Yeah. So would you give it good or great vibes?
I would give it great vibes.
Okay. Yeah. And obviously for my review, I gave it a great vibes. I thought it handled things. I kind of agree with Ash. It's, the streamlining, great. The graphical style, just matched perfectly. Really did a fantastic job of capturing the spirit of Breath of the Wild. And I thought mechanically this is a much stronger game than the original Hyrule Warriors. It's more streamlined. Yeah. There's not as much bloat as Ash was saying. There's a lot of extra stuff to do, and it's repetitious, but that's a Warriors game. That's what you're getting into with this series. And the big difference here is what you prefer or not between the first or second is, do you want a lot of characters from all the classic series? You can just go hog wild with all these possibilities, or do you want a more limited cast that only kind of makes sense for this setting? So there's that aspect, but there's also just the fact that there seems to be a bit more tactics with the original Hyrule Warriors. I remember that game constantly having them running between bases in order to keep up the loyalty. I forget the term for it, but the motivation of your army to keep them pushing forward and keeping things going your way. There is basically none of that. The only reason to capture bases in this game is to get the materials. That's all I ever did it for.
There are some side quests that require you to keep your bases, safe and not taken over, but they're later in the game, typically higher level side quests.
Yeah, and they're not, again, usually it was capture this, you're good, move on to the next one. It's never had to double back.
Yeah, you never had to maintain them.
Yeah, and I think that's because the levels themselves tended to be so much bigger than what you got with the original Hyrule Warriors. So it was a lot more condensed.
Which feels very Breath of the Wild.
Yeah. It's a give and take aspect to it, and it comes down more to personal preference. I was actually speaking with Ted XN Shadow a little bit before recording this, because he's been playing through it, and he was a massive fan of Hyrule Warriors. He didn't even really play Warriors games.
I remember he played the hell out of that game.
I swear to God, 100% completed Hyrule Warriors Definitive Edition, which means he has done all the adventure maps, all the characters up to their max levels, everything. I think he has like thousands of hours in this game for whatever reason, and just devoured it. And this one of his big complaints is it feels like the boss enemies, have very spongy health. where it
Isn't
takes a
that
while
kinda-
for them to go down. And I don't see that for most of them. Either they go down quick or they don't. And Lionel's are the ones that feels like, oh God, just die already.
Yeah.
I would
for
say
all of them.
Hinox's can be up there too.
Hinox's can be too, yeah.
But I feel like that's
although they
also
have-
kind of just endemic to Hyrule Warriors in general, boss enemies, or Musou games in general, aren't they? Like boss enemies having really high health?
They can be, but apparently it's according to that. I haven't played the original Hyrule Warriors in a while,
Sure.
so I can't compare
Sure.
directly.
I can say from memory, and it's been a while for me too, but I feel like bosses in AOC are definitely more spongy than those in the OG Hyrule Warriors.
Gotcha.
I feel like towards later in the game, it was very easy to power through some of those boss characters, whereas in Hyrule Warrior or AOC, they stay kind of around the same level of difficulty in terms of how much punishment they can take. And I do have to say, it kind of, for me, it wasn't a big deal. Like, I didn't mind it, but it definitely took me out of like the power fantasy aspect of the game a bit. Because like you're Link and you're just shield surfing through moblins and stuff, you know,
Yeah.
or bokoblins and stuff. And then, you know, you're taking all this time to take down like a guardian or a silver moblin or a Lionel, you know, and it's like, well, I kind of remember from Breath of the Wild how the power scale works on these enemies, and those bosses have gotten a massive increase.
Yeah.
If I can literally just jump on my shield and take out 200 bokoblins at once.
Right. Well, yeah, no, I mean, and that's true. I guess for me, I started feeling that less later in the game because I started learning the more the intricacies of the mechanics in terms of abusing
Right.
stasis and keeping a loop of stasis and weak point gauge and weak point hit, and then either using stasis again or using bombs, remote bombs to, you know, once you learn what makes enemies stagger, you can kind of keep them in a loop of being staggered and hit with a weak point smash until they die. It's easier on certain enemies, like Guardians. It's super easy to do. Hinox is
Yeah.
kind of easy. Lionel's going to be a little harder, but in general, once you learn the mechanics, you're able to kind of keep them stun locked, I guess. And so I guess maybe the health didn't feel like as much of an issue at that point. But yeah, there were definitely some later game quests where, especially those silver Lionels or the white made Lionels, or God forbid the Malice Lionels, have so many HP, and it can definitely wear you down after a bit.
At least the elemental, fire and ice enemies, like you could just take out the rods,
Yep.
destroy that
too.
weak point
Yeah.
gauge, tear through them. That helps a lot.
Right, the
Yeah.
rods were great for that, for keeping enemies locked and stuff. I do wish one thing I'll say, sorry Steve, one thing I'll say about the rods is I wish that they weren't only refillable through certain enemies. I wish you could
Yes.
pay, that there was a shop that you could pay at along with all the other shops, it'll just refill your magic.
Yeah, agreed on that. The one thing I wanted to say was that I think the Malice infected enemies were one of my favorite additions in AOC. Like, I would have loved for Malice Lionels and stuff to be like end game enemies in the original Breath of the Wild, and I'm hoping that they'll somehow take
Yeah.
that and move it into Breath of the Wild too, because I remember the first time I saw it, it was like the first truly new thing, new variation of a enemy I was familiar with that I saw, and I was like, oh, this is cool. Like, I really like this.
Yeah.
That Ganon's Malice could infect like already bad guys and make them more powerful. I was like, this should have been in Breath of the Wild. This is cool. I like this. I would have loved for Hyrule Castle to just have Malice infected enemies that are way buffed up and way more dangerous, to give you kind of that last like holy shit kind of moment when you're going to fight Ganon, like, oh man, they were saving something real bad for me over here. So I dig that a lot, and I'm really hoping that we see some kind of like end game kind of enemies in Breath of the Wild 2. This is a great idea, and I sincerely hope this was something that Nintendo was like, yep, we're going to steal that.
That'd be really cool. And I like the fact that they found a way to get every single enemy that was in the original Breath of the Wild into this game. That was pretty impressive, to be honest. I did not expect that. I thought a few would get cut, like the keys. Like, they're not going to bring in the keys, but they found, like, here's some keys. Okay. It made it really interesting. And then we, had the new variations for the elemental enemies and, of course, then the Malice enemies. And it really did feel like it was all part of Breath of the Wild. It really captures that aspect. And the themed Warriors games can be fantastic at that idea, where they like graft that new thing onto Warriors, and somehow it still feels like that original thing. And they accomplish that once again in Age of Calamity. But should we get into the story first, or I feel like we got to go to the story first before we do like talk about our favorite characters and whatnot, or things that might not have gone too bad, because that was kind of the pull of this game before it came out. I was like, yeah, it's a Warriors game, but it's a Warriors game that's a prequel to Breath of the Wild, and the potential of that, and how it could all end, and everybody just talking about it. But then you play the demo and you see the little egg guardian going back in time immediately. He's like, oh no.
Yeah. I know that immediately all three of us were not sure about the time travel when we first learned of it. And it definitely, I think that's probably a good thing to talk about. It certainly introduced potential problems for me, just because time travel is something that's very difficult to get right, as we all know. In fact, it says a lot that one of the games that does still get it right was made in 94, or came out in 94, 95. Yeah. And by that, I mean, of course, Chrono Trigger. But I think that they both averted the worst, but I think they didn't retcon anything in the sense that I was worried about them doing it. But I also don't think the game does a very good job at communicating that. Like I learned probably the most important plot point in the game with respect to time travel from a loading screen blurb. Yeah. And that says a lot, I think. And I'm guessing, Derrick, sounds like you probably had the same experience.
Yeah, that's kind of what I've figured out. I was like, okay, that's how that worked. Because they don't really dive into how the time travel happened. They kind of deal with time travel by just not addressing it. It's like, this happened because of the little egg guardian, and that's all you need to know. Shut up.
We heard we heard their screams or their calls for help on the other side of whatever egg guardian was doing. And, it just, they kind of hand wave it. Like, I heard that you needed help, so I followed this little egg guardian through time, and here I am. Like, it definitely did not, they didn't try to address it, really.
I'm not going to lie, guys. This is my least favorite thing about this game. And it holds it back a huge amount, in my opinion. Like, so I can only... the first thing I have to say is, like, the time travel aspect of this game and the way they did it makes it feel to me like one of those, and it was all a dream kind of things. Like, so to me, it made the story instantly stop mattering, because it is not telling me the story of 100 years before the Breath of the Wild. It is now telling me an alternate universe timeline that isn't canon, or at least isn't canon in the sense of the Breath of the Wild 1 that we played. Because, I mean, are we going full spoiler? Is that what we're doing?
Oh, yeah, we're doing...
we are.
If we didn't indicate it already,
so
we're going full spoiler.
Lose in the end. You don't lose. You defeat Ganon 100 years before Breath of the Wild 1 happens. You're not in the same timeline. And that is a huge, 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 huge problem for me, because I want... And I said this, like, I'm on record saying this many, many times. I want the story of how Zelda lost the war. I want Link being sealed away in the end. I want to lose at the end of this story. To me, that was where the emotional pay dirt was. And I am not going to lie. If you had given me this game with all the technical issues, the random drops to 15 frames per second, the too many enemies on screen for it to not stutter itself to death sometimes, or Bosa's lightning attack breaking the game sometimes, like, I would have accepted all of that. And if it gave me the story I imagine that Nintendo could have delivered if they didn't do the time travel thing, this game would have come damn near to being one of my favorite games of all time. Like, I mean, a pure bliss, no doubt. And that is what is so heartbreaking to me, because there is this incredible story that still isn't being told. And I have to imagine, I have to give Koei Tecmo the benefit of the doubt and say that Nintendo was like, yeah, you can do a game before that, but we don't know if we want you guys telling that story. Maybe we'll want to tell it later. So we're going to have to get creative about how you get to explore this era in Hyrule. Like, I have to imagine Nintendo maybe thought, like, oh, but maybe we'll want to go back to it, and we'll want to do a more traditional Zelda style game set during that war, which they won't. No. It's Nintendo.
Well, At the end of the day, though, I mean, and I agree. I definitely think that held it back a little bit. But at the same time, two things. One, couldn't you kind of already argue that they have told the story just through memories and cutscenes, that we kind of already know how it all plays out? I mean, I assume that when everything's flashing to white for all four Guardians, we're seeing the moments of their deaths, of their respective deaths, except things change now. Now an alternate universe has been created, and the four descendants pop through the time holes and change things. But, yeah, so, I mean, couldn't it be said that maybe they did already tell that story? And
to a degree,
and I guess
it just would have been more visceral to be actually in there and be an active participant, I think is what Steve's getting at here.
No, and I hear you. We're never going to experience that in I
mean, we get Zelda's awakening, and to have that in the moment where she's protecting a dying Link and then going like by herself to confront Ganon, that'd be truly powerful to see her just go towards that to attempt to see.
Yeah, that's the other big thing. Like, Zelda gets robbed of what could have been the best character moment for her in the history of the franchise. Like, think of her being Link's savior, then knowingly going into a battle with Ganon that she can't win.
She can only go into a stalemate. She only go into a stalemate. You're not fighting to beat Ganon. You're fighting to seal Ganon. That's how it ends.
Yeah, along with yourself.
Yeah.
And it is just,
there's elements there, and I can see both points. I can see Ashes where, we've seen it. We kind of know. They don't need to fill in the gaps. But on the other hand, it's like there is something visceral about being there, seeing it in the whole aspect of it. And I'll be honest, like when it was coming up and like already the attack, the Ganon was coming out of Hyrule Castle and all the attack was happening, I'm like, this feels really early. Like, are we already close to the end? Like, what the heck is going on? But then I was like, wait a second. This happened when they were at one of the, like, after Zelda attempted one of the springs. Why is it happening here? And, like, it's being like, are they going to retcon this? Are they going to change it up? And then you say all the champions losing. And like, all right, well, we'll see how this all goes. Maybe this is just quick and you're playing as Link and Zelda for longer than I thought. And then they come from the future. And I got to admit, part of me was like, oh, crap, that's cool.
Yeah.
Just because, there's possibilities there. Like seeing Mipha and Sidon fight side by side. That's cool. Or Bosa and Riju. That's cool. I don't care about Yunobo. And I don't think about Teba too much. But those two in particular, that's really cool, and have those interactions and seeing how it all kind of culminates. But so you're trading an emotionally payoff thing for a really cool what if scenario thing, because on its own I did enjoy the story. Yes, it's not the prequel we were hoping for, but on its own thing, which was already basically it wanted to have that crazy action of a Musou game, and they needed time travel to make it work and have a roster that can support that, because the roster without that stuff would be incredibly tiny. Basically, you would have Link, Zelda, the champions, and Hestu.
Hestu?
I think that's kind of like, that was like the second of the two things I was going to mention, is that if you go into it kind of remembering what the marketing conceit of this game is, right? It's, hey, it's Breath of the Wild Musou. You get to play as all these different characters, and you know that invariably, unless they did it as DLC, that was more than likely going to need to include the four descendants at the very least. At the very least,
and I thought it was going to be a bonus mode to include those, sort of like the adventure stuff, and they just have it outside the main story. But then it was all integrated, and I'm like, okay. Yeah,
it's weird because like I completely agree with your criticism, Steve. Like I think that definitely it ultimately being inconsequential, or at least no more consequential than an alternate timeline, is disappointing. At the same time, I did feel like I was able to have my cake and eat it too, because I'm thinking about certain missions like where you are rescuing the champions, especially the one where it's raining. I think it's the Mipha and maybe it's not, but there are two missions where you rescue the champions, and one of them it's like raining, and one of the songs it's playing, I think it's called Push Forward. It's one of my favorite songs in the game, and I had my headphones on. I'm like, oh man, I feel like I'm in the apocalypse of Breath of the Wild. Like, I have to go save Urbosa, and Derrick and the rest of them before they are killed by the Blight Ganons. And it felt like I was getting to experience the coolest parts of 100 years ago while still also getting the emotional payoff of a what if happy ending. Like, and that's where I kind of come down with you, Derrick, is I loved seeing these interactions that were never possible before. I got a little emotional seeing Mipha and Sidon talk. She's talking about how proud she is of him, and that from his perspective, she died, and he never got to have that relationship with his sister. So for me, I kind of felt like I got to have my cake and eat it too, even though I do also agree with what you're saying, Steve. So it's kind of a weird thing.
For me, I feel like the happy ending is a blight on this game.
Happy Blight Ganon.
Because I remember when I was getting to that point, and I agree with most of what you said, Ash. Like, I definitely, especially with Sidon and Mipha, like I definitely felt like, oh my god, this is amazing. Because Sidon, one, is an amazing character in his own right, and Mipha is like my favorite, champion.
Yeah.
And so knowing that they had that kind of sibling relationship, and that he was just a baby essentially when she died, like getting to see him all grown up, him knowing that he grew up without his sister, and seeing her like that definitely was a great emotional moment from a storytelling perspective. But then there's the part of me that still was like hanging on, like, man, they could still just make this like a really tragic, like everybody loses kind of thing, and kind of say, like Ganon was too powerful, they weren't able to alter the course of fate or whatever. Just because I feel like, that I still would have liked it to set up the events for Breath of the Wild. I think that's what really, really gets me, because I think that for all those great character moments we get with the champions, we lose out on that incredibly poignant one for Zelda. And again, like I kept saying, like, I want my microwave hallway moment in this game.
Right.
I want Zelda to have to do this incredibly painful thing that highlights just what a badass, brave character she is, because she's often, even in Breath of the Wild, they're kind of guilty of just making her look like she's just an academic who's obsessed with her Sheikah slate more than the incredibly brave character that we know she is later on. Like, they spend 75% of the game just showing her, like, struggling to be who she is, and then we get that little bit at the end with her and Ganon. And I would have loved for them to expand more on Zelda, and I get that you can't have both, but
they kind of do, because we get to see the possibilities of Zelda actually awakening the power and coming into her own, and her becoming a decisive leadership force, like just taking charge, and just it's a really cool moment to see Zelda in this much control, especially with a father that looks down on her this much. Like like
King Rhoam.
He's a bit rough. And the funny thing is, there is that nice little reconciliation between the two of them, but he takes a step back. Like, it's your show now. She just leads the charge, and
I really
felt good. Like, I gotta say, her, I don't know if her awakening is as emotionally earned as the original. Just trying to protect Link once again. It really isn't that you're trying to push for it, because unfortunately one of the things they did, you have to pull from the original Breath of the Wild in order to get that sort of connection between Link and Zelda, and sort of the way they were rubbing it against each other, and sort of the building respect. You don't really get that here, because you have to sort of take the cutscenes you get here before the time change, along with all the
memories,
flashbacks and memories, and combine them in order to get a complete story, in order to get that more emotional payoff for Zelda's awakening in Age of Calamity. But then it happens, and you're like, oh, we're getting to see Zelda unleashed. And it just felt, that probably felt like the most powerful, like even more so than Link getting the Master Sword. This felt like the moment where, like, I felt unstoppable.
Yeah. No, I thought it was really cool. Like, I actually, and I agree with you, Steve, in terms of having to sacrifice one for the other, but I was actually, in the end, once we finally got to that point, I was really happy with the way they presented Zelda, and like, when she awakens her power, it's one of the first times in the series that you really get to play as any version of Zelda where she is awakened, and you see why she's so powerful, and she's not just this kind of waify damsel. And of course there are exceptions, of course, to that, but in general, I thought this game, ironically, all this time later was one of the first games to really make the player see why is it called The Legend of Zelda. And it's a Hyrule Warriors game. It's not even The Legend of Zelda, blah, blah, blah. It's a Hyrule Warriors game, but she's a true badass in this game once you get there. And even though I agree that the circumstances surrounding her awakening in this game aren't as emotionally compelling as they were in the original timeline, it is, if you extrapolate it down to, if you just kind of like extrapolate things, it's essentially the same thing. I mean, I think we can conclude that Link would have died trying to fight off all 4 Blight Ganons at once if she hadn't turned around and been inspired to protect him. And I did like the parallel between her, a few missions prior being pulled away by Link from her dad. She thinks she's responsible for the death of her dad, King Rhoam. She wasn't able to awaken her power in time to save him, so she is feeling like she let him down and let him die. And then a few missions later, Impa is pulling her away again, and she's like, no, not this time. And she turns around and she sees, her hero fighting these 4 giant monsters who probably were going to kill him, and she saves his life. It isn't explicitly laid out that he would have died, but in my headcanon at least, I don't think he would have won that fight. Link is amazing, and the game goes to great lengths to show you how talented and how powerful he is, but even he is still just human, even if he is the hero. And you could tell, even from that little snippet of the battle we do see, Link was having trouble, fending all 4 of them off at once. So I like to think, at least, that even if we don't see the outcome of that battle, that she probably did save his life and awakened into this badass. And then you play as her awakened, and she's like, shooting light everywhere and doing all this cool stuff, levitating like some goddess. I guess she is technically a goddess, but I really like the way they handled Zelda in this, I have to say.
Yeah, I agree completely with what you said. I think Zelda as a playable character is one of my, awakened Zelda is one of my favorites. I think that I agree with you that Link, the impression I got was that he was going down. The Blight Ganons were definitely going to take him out, and she awakened her power in the nick of time to help him, destroy them. Or at least fend them off, because the Blight Ganons come back a little too much for my taste in this game.
They're a bit overused.
Yeah. And I feel like I feel like you kind of get it, but I agree that it just doesn't have that same emotional payoff that it has in Breath of the Wild. I think that they did a better job with Zelda's actual awakening, but I think Age of Calamity does a far better job in portraying the power that she wields. She is definitely just way more badass than I expected her to be in her awakened state. So yeah, I agree. I liked it a lot.
Mm-hmm. I guess the other major moment that I want to discuss is everybody's like, well, Eggy's going to betray you. And I honestly thought that wasn't going to happen based off of the alternate time. Well, he's just your buddy the entire time. And now they go places with, what's ends up being his name's Terraco, with him actually turning evil. And you having to fight him and destroy him. That's the thing. I thought it was just dismantle. No, you take him down, and then he sacrifices himself at the end to help Zelda, which is just you kind of bond with this little guy because he's playing, her song. It's cute the entire way. There's this nice antagonistic relationship with Impa. It really, you find out it's a gift from her mother from childhood, which is all those connections. They really found a way to break those heartstrings for Terraco, and I was impressed with how far they went with that with him. And I thought this time travel aside, it was a good addition.
Yeah, I would agree with that, especially because you see that Terraco isn't a willing participant. It is very clear that Calamity Ganon forcibly, infects Terraco with his malice and turns Terraco evil, and then that's when you have to fight him. But, it's not as though Terraco was evil all along and, here you go, he betrayed you. I think what made it better and sadder is that it wasn't a betrayal. It was a forced betrayal. And that just made you want to take down Calamity Ganon even more. And Terraco, I thought, was a cool addition. I wish they'd gone a little further with explaining exactly how Terraco was built and why this little mini guardian is able to do what it's able to do, like, in terms of the time travel stuff. And I wish there was more context surrounding Terraco, but I think ultimately that it was a good addition to the story. And like you said, Derrick, it gave you a little insight into Zelda's relationship with her mom, the wedge that was driven in between Zelda and her dad once her mom died, and he said, you need to focus on your training and no more Terraco. So it definitely gave more emotional weight. Might even explain the
tech obsession, because made her feel closer to her mom.
Exactly. So I really appreciated the emotional weight that added to Zelda's relationship with her parents, especially because we don't ever see much of her mom. And it made you care by the end about this little guy. I just wish there was more. I wish they'd explored more of the intrigue. Like, why does she have a baby guardian? Why is this baby guardian able to time travel? Like, how far back does this go? Was this planned all along? But at the end of the day, you can see from the way they presented certain story elements, they just weren't interested in delving into that. Again, you essentially have to find out that this all is indeed an alternate universe in a loading screen blurb, and that's just ridiculous to me. Yeah. You find out, or at least I found out Terraco's name in a loading screen.
Yeah, blurb. I got his name before. Like, I guess that's the little thing's name.
That's his name. Okay, sure, yeah. So there was definitely some storytelling problems. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. The I like Terraco as an addition. I mean, I like that. Again, it's an original character design that fits in well with the existing universe. Like, it's a believable thing that could have existed in Breath of the Wild. The one thing that annoyed me, though, I want to say they did a great job with Terraco's betrayal, right? Because it was done in a way that made sense. I remember the minute I saw Terraco, I was like, why is he not possessed like the other Guardians? And I was like, he's definitely a guardian of some kind. Or it is definitely a guardian of some kind. Why is it not being infected by malice like everything else? Like the whole story of Breath of the Wild was Ganon took over all the Guardians, and that's what turned the tide of the war. So I was like, and then finally when Terraco gets possessed or taken over, I thought I was like, okay, at least it makes sense why it's happening. Mm-hmm. But then when you're fighting Terraco, and it's got all these really cool weapons and stuff, I'm like, where were these? Like when I'm fighting hundreds of enemies and Terraco's like off to the side just scuttling around. I'm like, you could have whipped out a sword? Yeah. You could have gotten 8 feet tall? Like, help a brother out, man.
Especially because you do eventually get to play as Terraco, and it can do stuff like that, other than growing 8 feet tall.
I know.
It has all these cool weapons, and
So I have not actually unlocked Terraco yet.
Okay.
I've been playing I've been stubbornly going through all the missions in order, so I'm almost there. I'm like 5 or 6 from getting to the missions. I completed all the map stuff to get all those parts, but I got to do the actual missions to finish those up and get those parts. But you told me, Ash, that the epilogue was actually pretty wonderful.
It got me. It got me. It definitely my eyes got a little bit wet. It was. Yeah, I mean, essentially, you're rebuilding Terraco, and the cutscene that you get, seeing that happen, is really cathartic. Given what we were talking about, how about the connection that it had with Zelda, and what it means to her in terms of her family and her mom, and not only that, but then you get an extended like alternate credit sequence after that I don't want to spoil for you, even though this is a spoiler discussion. Yeah, you get like an alternate credit sequence or an extended one that is really just, it warms your heart, and it's really, so definitely go check it out. I don't want to ruin it for you here, but and then you get to play as Terraco, he's a lot of fun to play as, I gotta say. Mm-hmm. He's a lot more fun than the other character that you unlock in the post game to play as, I think.
I was just looking up the list to see if there's any other characters that were getting unlocked, because I wasn't sure if Terraco was actually getting unlocked, because it's a nice even split, setup. I'm like, are there 4 more characters, or is this just it? So I was like, it must just be for a scene. But then, sure enough, it's actually that. And has anybody actually 100%ed the game?
I did. Not. I actually did just recently. I kept just like doing I did like a mission or two here and there, just kind of like dropped in when I had a couple of minutes between things to do. I would just play a mission, and again, it didn't feel like it didn't feel like a slog. It felt like something, because it was so streamlined, that I knew exactly what I needed to get materials wise, and then missions are short enough that you can just drop in, do one, then go about your day, do work, whatever, and then play a couple more. And so it took me a while, but I didn't really get tired of it, and it allowed me to unlock Calamity Ganon as the final playable character, and I gotta say, I think he's kind of disappointing as a last unlock. I don't really find him fun to play as. But yeah, like I enjoyed kind of seeing the whole thing through as I just kind of slowly chipped away at it.
Yeah, I just was looking up a list and I only just now found out that Calamity Ganon was playable. I'm like, oh, well, that's kind of cool.
It's not as cool as you think, amazingly.
That I really want to know, since you 100%ed the game, and it's something I haven't unlocked yet myself, the original Hyrule Warriors outfit. How does that look in the Breath of the Wild
style
visuals? Yeah,
it looks fine. I mean, it looks like Breath of the Wild Link, wearing a slightly cel shaded version of the original Hyrule Warriors outfit.
I was excited when I saw that.
Sorry, what?
Say what?
I was excited when I saw that costume as the 100%
it's cool.
completion bonus.
It's a cool Easter egg. It's just not like after everything else you've done in the game, it isn't going to blow your mind. I don't think.
Right.
But but it's a cool thing to have. Yeah.
I'm a particularly big fan of that design of Link. Like, I think it is probably the coolest, like, the traditional Link outfit has ever looked. So when I saw it, I was like, oh man, I want to get that.
And there's a really cool in-game, like basically the ultimate side quest, like the hardest, highest level side quest you have to do to 100% the map it's a really challenging one, unless you get over leveled, of course, but it's a really challenging one that really requires you to like think on your feet and have characters stationed at different places to, make sure you don't lose, essentially. And it's called the Siege of Fort Hateno, and it's, I think the Siege of Fort Hateno, and it's a really cool mission, like last mission that culminates in everything. So so yeah, no, it's I never thought that I would 100% a Muso game, but again, this one's easier to chip away at and actually feel like you can finish it still, as opposed to something like the OG Hyrule Warriors, or especially Definitive Edition, where I didn't even try. I didn't even think about trying.
I think I'm at like 65% by now, right, at this point. I haven't checked recently, so I'm not sure.
What's funny is it took me, I think I was the last of us to beat it, or was it, did
you
I
were
finish
the
it before it? Okay, yeah, so I was the last of us to finish it by far, because of, all the stuff we're always doing. I have work and stuff. But then I was the only one who also eventually 100%ed it.
Go figure.
Yeah, for me, I put it down shortly after I beat it, and then like Cyberpunk came in, and that became a focus, and I kept telling myself like, I'll go back to it, but it's kind of fallen off the radar for me now. I want to, because it's not like I said, I like the game. I like it a lot, and I think it could have been, I think with some different narrative choices, it could have been a top 10 game for me, like of all time.
Oh wow, all time.
Wow.
But it, I don't know. It just, I guess now that I've gotten through the story, there's nothing really dragging me back to it in terms of
you don't like feel right now, the pull to like, I really want this thing, or I want to see what this does, that kind of thing.
Exactly. I think what's going to happen is that when we get solid Breath of the Wild 2 info, and I have that itch I can't scratch, like I just need a Zelda infusion in my life, because we all know we're going to get there. Like Breath of the Wild 2 trailers are going to drop, and we're going to be 6 months out from release, and we're all going to just be itching for some way to sate that hype. And I feel like that is when I'm going to just take a deep dive back into this game and try to 100% it, because I will need some type of something to fill the Zelda-shaped hole in my heart. But before then, I don't know that I'm going to like jump back into it, because, I mean, you guys know as well as I do, there's always another game around the corner, and there's always another video to make.
And there's also a building backlog at all times, so...
Exactly.
Yeah,
so.
And I think that's a good approach. I would say that to the extent that that you have any current emotional investment in the game and its characters, I would recommend that you at least play to that last cutscene where you revive Terraco, because it's a nice bookend on the experience. It's a nice way to close the book on the game proper, and then you can go back later and 100% it if you want. But it's a really good way to close the book on the main experience of the game narratively, and so I thought it was a really good natural endpoint personally.
Well, it's funny that with the last story point I wanted to mention, it kind of ties into what Ash is saying about that unlockable. I didn't find the Ganon fight in this one to be all that memorable. I'm struggling to remember it this time. He possessed Astor, and then you have a big fight, and it kind of pulls in elements, but it just wasn't that interesting, and which is unfortunate, because I remember when I played the original Hyrule Warriors. And when I played through the story first time, I played in Japanese. So I think that had a bit of effect of it. So I didn't have all the stuff telling like, hey, do this. very clearly. I was just sort of figuring it out on my own. And that boss fight against Ganon, like when he's in his giant pig form fighting that, felt like a culmination of that game. And he's just stomping all over the battlefield. It felt like a big, momentous occasion. And this one is kind of like the actual Ganon fight in Breath of the Wild. It's like, yeah, he's here. Beat him up. Take care of him. You're done.
Yeah.
It was even more or less memorable than that because I thought like I think it's called Dark Beast Ganon, the true final boss in Breath of the Wild. As cool as it was as a spectacle, I thought it was a really weak battle itself. But prior to that, when you're fighting Calamity Ganon in Hyrule Castle in his creepy spider form, that was cool. That was memorable to me. Like in this game, when you fight him in Hyrule Castle's Inner Sanctum, it's just a big humanoid form. It's like a bigger, badder, redder version of Demise almost. Like it just doesn't really, it's not that interesting a design to me. Compared to Breath of the Wild's like spider form. So I agree. I like the music, and that's something I'll touch on later. I thought the music was great for that battle, but in terms of the actual like what he looks like and the fight itself, didn't really do it for me as much. If anything, I thought Harbinger Ganon was a little cooler because you're essentially fighting an alternate universe Terraco that never escaped
this universe
through a time tunnel.
This version
and that's kind of a cool thing.
Era's Terraco that got possessed.
Yeah, and somehow grew.
I will say the one thing for Calamity Ganon, like the Age of Calamity version of Calamity Ganon, I like that it wasn't just a copy paste of Calamity Ganon from Breath of the Wild. I was deeply concerned that we were just going to get the same design because I mean you could make that make sense, right? But the other thing that I liked was that Calamity Ganon was more humanoid in nature. Like one of the things that I truly disliked about Breath of the Wild, one of my very few criticisms of that game is that Ganon wasn't a character in that game. Like
he's not.
He was just a monster. And one of the things I love about older Zelda games is that you see the progression of Ganon from someone who is just deeply ambitious to outright evil to literally becoming a monster. And, you know, we don't get that at all in Breath of the Wild. Like, we don't even know for a fact in Breath of the Wild that Ganon was ever a person, right? It's
Breath of the Wild 2
heavily
gives us
implied,
that,
but it's never shown to you.
Yeah, Breath of the Wild 2 intonates that, but it's also one of those things is like he's just become so mindlessly driven to power that he's become a literal infestation, which is a progression of his monstrous form from the past games, but there's no narrative what came before
connection there.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, because I think one of the coolest thing. Oh, go ahead, Steve.
I was just going to say, I while I don't dig the boss fight, and I do think the design is a little uninspired, I do like the idea that it's like a proto-Calamity Ganon, something between what we see in Breath of the Wild 1 and something, you know, later on, you know, after presumably his human birth, which I think it's cool. It gives us kind of just a different view on Ganon, even if it's not the most exciting thing.
True.
Yeah, no, I agree. It lets you see what Ganon would have looked like, or what he did look like when Zelda went to seal him in the original timeline, because we never saw that. So, you know, in Breath of the Wild 1, it makes sense that after being given 100 years to fester and grow and become more powerful, by the time Link fights him, he is this giant, disgusting spider monster, you know? But that's not something that we ever would have gotten to see had the timeline we see in AOC always been the what happened. Because it never would have given that 100 years to see what he would eventually morph into. So I do like that we're seeing what this monstrous, powerful, you know, infection version of Ganon looked like at his prime, at the height of his power, before given 100 more years to grow. And yeah, so I definitely agree with you there. But it does lose that narrative element, which Breath of the Wild kind of did anyway by being so vague in terms of where it exists in the timeline, if it does even exist in the timeline. You know, there are so many theories we go into about that, but, you know, because you don't have those cemented connections to other games, it does rob it of a bit of its, you know, emotional weight. Like, Wind Waker Ganondorf works so well because you saw what he was in prior games. You saw, as you guys were saying, the progression of what he was to what he had become in the Wind Waker. Same thing to a lesser extent in Twilight Princess. So, but yeah, you lose that emotional connection to previous games in Breath of the Wild, and that I think kind of robs a lot of his character, robs Ganon of a lot of his character.
Yeah, he's just a thing to beat at that point.
Right.
But, well, speaking of characters, thank you for that segue, Ash.
Oh, yeah.
There was quite a few playable characters, and I'm kind of get a quick, just, we tend to ramble on for a little bit, but just wanted to get a quick impression of each character and what we thought playing them as we went through.
Each one. Ooh, let me bring up a list right
I have a list right here, so I got a list.
Okay,
so
cool.
You're okay. So right off the bat, we have Link, and he has 3 different forms. We have traditional sword and shield, we have spear, and we have his great sword, so two-handed. Which was your favorite of those forms?
Oh man, I was a one-handed
Same.
like sword and shield Link all the way. I mean,
Yeah.
you go into that game and you're like, he's gonna get the Master Sword. Why am I gonna screw around, with anything else?
Right.
So I literally just as I was going through the game ignored the other weapons because I was like, once I get the Master Sword, that's all I'm sticking with, and it held true. Plus, I already knew if I wanted to play a spear, I would play Mipha. If I wanted to play a heavier weapon, I'd play Derrick. I kind of had these ideas of who would work with what weapons. And so Link was just the Master Sword guy.
I experimented with all of his different playstyles just because I wanted to see. And I really, really appreciate and love the creativity that goes into his greatsword moveset. It's actually pretty great. I don't enjoy using it
sacrificing
nearly
health
as much.
to have an apple to get it back and keep going.
It's
That's
really
fun.
cool. And I think it's either his weak point smash or his special attack where he just beats on him over and over again, just like a rapid fire overhead slash. I really enjoy the spectacle and the creativity in the greatsword moveset, but I much prefer using him in his sword and shield form. And I'd like you, Steve. Once I got the Master Sword, for me, there was no going back for that character. And, his spear moveset's pretty cool. But again, when I think spear, I think Mipha. And to a lesser extent, Sidon. So,
yeah. I enjoyed his spear moveset just because I basically got with Ash with the greatsword stuff. And, once I had the Master Sword, it was only sword and shield. But the spear did have a lot of range, had some interesting moves. He had a nice sense of speed to him with the spear.
He did.
That did make him feel different. But Link really is just that go-to character that you can just easily play through and know what you're doing. And I liked how his moves evolved. It all felt good, I guess is the best way to put it.
And Link with one-handed sword Link is obviously designed to be the character that's easy to use and approach and will carry you through the game if you're not interested in learning other movesets. He will carry you, and he carried me through a lot of the late game missions on my, slow, gradual path to 100% just because I eventually got a little tired of the repeated boss enemies and the high health, and I just wanted to be able to get through some of those late game missions as fast as possible, and Link is very good for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Next up is Impa.
I mean, what can you say other than badass? I mean, yeah. She had the whole shadow clone thing going on. She did the Naruto ninja run. You could have 5 clones on screen. She's awesome.
Yeah. Impa is the coolest character in this whole game for me. I love that she, she's basically a ninja, like Ash said, and I love the fact that she even does hand seals before she does
so good.
it is it is essentially playing a Naruto character.
Yeah,
and, pretty much.
I mean, you kind of get the idea that the Sheikah were very ninja like, starting with Ocarina of Time and all the way through, but Breath of the Wild kind of gave you the implication that maybe they were kind of ninja like, especially because the Yiga clan was also kind of, I mean, they were goofy and ran on bananas, but they were very ninja-esque, right? And I absolutely love just how they went all in on that with Impa. I want her in Smash. I want an action game set in the Breath of the Wild universe where I can just play as Impa, doing stealth Sheikah missions. Give me a Shinobi ripoff with Impa using her Naruto moves, and I will pay you whatever price.
It took me a little bit to fully grasp her moveset, but once you do, she can chew through those weak point gauges.
Yep.
It is.
Yeah, she
she
really
is
can.
ridiculously effective. Like once you figure out like building up those symbols and like what it all means, and then having it, and you're dead. Like she's one of my best characters.
Yeah, I think she was designed to be one of those easy to learn, hard to master characters, but they dramatically overestimated the difficulty of mastering her because she's pretty easy to master.
Yeah,
and she ends up just kicking ass. Like I said, give me a whole game with just her.
I really like Impa in this game. She's not one of my top favorites. She's like my one tier underneath my favorites to play as. But I just love, I mean, as you said, Steve, she's essentially a ninja with all of her, the hand gestures and the running animation. And I will say, in terms of her being playable in Smash, I think that would be awesome, but I still slightly prefer the OG Hyrule Warriors version with her Naginata.
That makes her a bit more unique, I think, because she
love that version of Impa. Just,
really
it's just a little more unique. Yeah, but either way, I'll take either one. Are you kidding me?
Yeah, seriously.
And Impa's a great character, and I loved not even just in a gameplay sense, but I loved her back and forth with Terraco. I loved kind of the animosity between her and Master Koga, and just she was a fun character just to have around. And I also enjoyed that she kind of ended up being Zelda's confidant, like cheerleader in a way. She was like not just her caretaker, but really cared about her almost as a sister. And I enjoyed seeing that relationship play out.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Next up is Zelda herself, which comes again in two forms, one with the Sheikah Slate, one with her Awakened Light powers. Sheikah Slate-wise, it took me a while to get it because it just felt so limited compared to everything else. But once you get that Sheikah Slate powered up and get her moves where you can do them multiple times, like building the cart and slamming it into enemies, I'm sorry, that's fun. I like that. It's not as versatile as all the others, but it can feel really good in certain circumstances.
Yeah, Zelda isn't my favorite character to play as, but in terms of battle, like she has one of the most unique like fighting styles, and it fits incredibly well with her character. Like I really love the fact that she is just all Sheikah Slate. Like that's how she fights, and she makes better use of it than anyone. Everyone has a Sheikah Slate, but she makes it her primary means of combat, and that is so cool. Like, I think it's a magnesis animation where she like swings something all the way around, comes close to the camera. And
I was going to mention that. I think it's her weak point smash.
I love that. Yeah, that's a weak point smash. Yeah,
I think it is.
She has some of the best, most varied combat animations in the game, and I think that to me, like, I like watching people that are good with her player. I'm just not really a fan of playing her myself.
Yeah, I think she definitely has. Sheikah Slate Zelda is one of the most creative movesets in the game, and I was going to mention that exact animation, Steve. One of the best in the game. The way she's swinging it around, it's great. And I love that it kind of. It brings across her pre-awakening kind of bumbling scientist researcher personality, right? She's like a little bit awkward and a little bit, she's not necessarily, regal, and she shouldn't be. She should be who she is, and she's a researcher. She wants to be a scientist. She's a little bit bumbling in that moveset, but in a good way. That is a nice contrast to her very regal, controlled, goddess-like animations in her awakened form.
And we've already spoken a bit about her awakened form, where it's like it is power unleashed. It's a little tricky to get used to, but once you get a handle on it and setting up those rings and then just punishing them with it, it feels good.
One of my favorite moves that Awakened Zelda, or Punish Zelda, whatever you want to call her, has is her stasis move, where she creates lots of different light orbs while the enemy's frozen, and then she sends them all at once, kind of like a bullet time type thing. One of the coolest moves in the game, and I just love that they go all in on making Zelda feel like this godlike force.
Yeah, agreed. I feel like her moveset is intentionally it both feels and looks OP, and I really like that about her because she deserves it.
She does.
She's literally channeling the power of the goddess Hylia. Like she should feel like just this incredible force to be reckoned with, and she is. They nailed it.
They did,
I absolutely love it. If anything, just crank up the damage she outputs even more. But she already can just devastate enemies. So I'm really, really happy with how they did this.
Next up is Mipha, who Might be the best character in the game.
Yeah, she's
Mipha.
Yeah,
Damn.
Yeah.
She is
Hell
so
yeah.
good.
She
So good.
wrecks house in mine. Like all of her combos can just do so much. She can heal herself. Just complete package. My God.
she's
And getting
awesome. Yeah,
getting headshots with Mipha to stun enemies is a piece of cake. Like,
Yeah, it is.
You use that. What is it called? The water, like the ZR move.
The little
where she
fountain, water
puts the little
fountain.
Yeah,
yeah,
water
where
fountain.
she,
And she swims up through it, and she is at eye level with just about any enemy when she comes out, and you just wail on them with the spear, and you can knock someone down to, like, you know. Ash talked about stun locking earlier. It is easier to do, in my opinion, with Mipha than with anyone else in the game.
Yeah,
She is,
I think so,
just
too.
through basic moves, you can do it.
Well, and she has far and away, at least in my opinion, I haven't studied every single one in terms of frame data, but for me, we already know that remote bombs are super effective against weak point gauges anyway. Mipha's remote bomb is stupidly OP. It
Yeah.
just there's a bit of a delay, so you have to, and I think it's a good thing because that means you have to be paying attention and plan for it. But if you can nail the timing, she has like 20 bombs at least, just rain hell on everything in front of you, and it just wrecks weak point gauges. And she's just she was one of my two favorite characters to play outside of Sword and Shield Link, and she's probably my favorite character in the game. I'm just going to say I was a big Mipha fan before being a Mipha fan was cool. She was always my favorite Guardian in Breath of the Wild, alongside Urbosa. She and Urbosa kind of competed, but I've always been a big fan of Mipha, and I'm so glad that they accurately kind of brought across her she walks softly and carries a big stick, or at least in this case a big trident personality. Like she's humble and she's meek and she's quiet, but don't screw with her, man, because she's so powerful, and I love it.
Yeah.
Next up-
Mipha is perfectly captured in this game, in my opinion. When I first started playing as her, I was like, how did Ganon manage to kill her? Because she is way too badass for Water Blight Ganon to take out. So
Right?
yeah,
You kind of wondered that
it's
about
absurd.
everybody, honestly, but
Yeah, especially
Well, that's fair.
especially when their descendants join them. It's like how could Mipha and Sidon together not take down Water Blight? Yeah.
all right. Next up is Derrick, which it took me a little bit to get used to him and him bringing up the stuff, but when you expand his combos more, I think that's when he becomes more effective. He's a good basic one with some trap elements to it, but I enjoy him, but it's nothing too crazy.
Steve's
Yeah,
reaction there kind of summed it up for me too.
I thought the magma mechanic was okay, but Derrick just did nothing for me. I
same.
You know, I like Gorons too. Like I would have thought that he would be one of my favorites because, you know, excuse me, I like the idea of like rolling around as a big rock dude and smashing stuff up, but something about him, he just didn't capture my interest at all in this game. But that being said, you know, I wanted to say this earlier, but I kind of missed my chance. I really liked the interplay between Derrick and Yonobo. Like, when they talk to each other. I don't know. I got like a buddy cop vibe off of them.
Yeah.
And I really
Master
liked
and
that.
Apprentice vibe, I think.
Yeah, it was cool. But other than that, like, Derrick as a character, as a playable character, I just had zero interest in playing as him. I played maybe 2 or 3 missions with him, and I just put him down and never bothered to look back. Like, he's just not interesting to me at all.
Same. I mean, basically, I only played as him in the few missions that you have to, and the side quests that you have to, after you unlock him. And I kind of tend not to play big, heavy characters in general, so that may be part of my bias against playing as him.
He's faster
I
than
do
most.
agree.
I think he's definitely better.
He is faster than a lot of heavy characters.
Yeah.
That's true. And I agree with you, Derek, that his moveset gets more fun once you unlock some of his later combos. But just in general, not really my cup of tea. But although I do agree with you, Steve, coming out of the original Breath of the Wild, Derrick and Yonobo were easily the champion and descendant I cared about the least, I would say.
Yep.
And this game added a lot to their characters and made me really care about them more. Like, I came out of this game much more a Derrick and even more of a Yonobo fan than I was prior to it.
Yeah. Well, I'm my fandom that I defend, but nobody else agrees with me on. Rivali. But though I love how everybody gives Rivali crap in this game.
Budget
And
Falco.
even Teba's like,
Yeah.
this is the champion? There's some great moments with that. That said, I was always excited to try him out. I didn't click with it. I could manage, but I did not click with his gameplay at all. Like, it just felt really awkward to try to get his arrows lined up the right way. I kind of got to figure out that I can manage, but it just didn't. It never felt natural enough to me.
Same. I don't like playing as either of the Rito in this game, but I like playing as Rivali even less. Like, Rivali did not.
I disagree, but I'll get to Teba when we get to Teba.
Fair enough. Yeah. Go ahead, Steve.
No, I was just gonna say, Rivali. I mean, we all know how I feel about Rivali the character. And mechanically, like, he was just a turnoff for me as well. I feel like arrows in this game in general aren't my favorite thing. I don't like bow and arrow. Like, when Link uses his bow and arrow, I'm not a big fan of how that works. I'm not a big fan of, and a character based around that mechanic is not going to be my favorite. Feelings about the content of that character's character aside. Rivali should be a recipe and not a playable character. That's where I'm at with this.
Yeah, it kind of like you said, Derek. Never came to grips with his moveset in the sense that I felt like I could reliably do what I needed and wanted to do. I will say, in terms of how he was portrayed in the game character-wise, he annoys the crap out of me. He always has. But I will say, somebody put it to me really nicely on Twitter. I can't remember who it was a few weeks ago, but they were saying, I'm glad that they didn't kind of change Rivali into this character who is at first aloof and at first standoffish and kind of an asshole, and then becomes nice. It's like, no, if anything, this game just makes it clear that he really does hate everybody as much as he lets on.
Exactly.
And that's like, and I respect that. Sure.
Yeah. All right, last of the champions, Urbosa, who she's just fantastic. Basically, Shield Link with lightning powers, and all of her lightning extensions are great. I love her flip where she's just carrying along and just devastating them. God, she feels good to play. Probably one of my favorites. Definitely in the top 5.
Top 3 for me, probably. I love playing as Urbosa, and it's just as rewarding as I hoped it would be.
Yeah, the only question I have from myself, like in terms of ranking them, is if she's above or beneath Mipha. I have a hard time with that. I'm going to say that I would probably put her beneath, again, because I mentioned this earlier, but a lot of her lightning moves, like, slow the game down so much.
Yeah.
Like,
I know
Urbosa is the frame rate killer.
She does, but for whatever reason, this stems from me being a kid. For me as a kid, like, when its game slows down, it's like, oh man, it's so action packed. The game can't even handle it. That's awesome.
Right.
And
so, I mean,
I had a moment in the final fight where just stuff all happening all over, and I unleashed a special. I think it might have been a Brosa special, and the game just started. Like, it could not keep up at all.
I think
part of me was like, "That's awesome."
I think I would put her just below Mipha as well myself. I love playing as her, but it isn't even just that her lightning attacks slow the game down performance-wise. Even some of her sword combos kind of plant her feet in place, and she just doesn't. She's not quite as mobile in her combos as Mipha is, in my opinion.
Yeah,
but I still love playing as her. And she has this one. I think it's a weak point smash that she'll do against Guardians and High Noxes, I think.
Oh, where she sticks the sword in the eye.
She plants her sword in the eye or in the body, and then she snaps and channels the lightning through her sword, and that's like the coolest, most brutal thing.
I know. It's like, oh my god, that's brutal. Up there age rating this game, that'll be a good. Like, fatality.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Hestu is our next character, which I'll be honest, I was like really thrown off. I'm like, really, Hestu?
Me too.
And I had this thing where I wanted to give each character a fair shake. I never used the level up mechanic that you could do to spend rupees in order to get all the characters up. I just played them and like worked at the lowest level characters and got them up to a decent amount. And I gotta say, I started to kind of like Hestu as I went along. He surprisingly can just tear through some weak point gauges with certain things. Mm-hmm. The problem with Hestu is that the range is crap. You have to be so close up. You have to be constantly dashing in order to get it. He's not very fast.
Yeah.
But you get them close. You pull off the moves. Like there's their most extended combo has them jumping onto a Deku Leaf and riding around, and you get that set up into an enemy, you can just see the health bar chipping down, and I kind of like them, even though they have a lot of issues.
Yeah. I mean, Hestu, like, mobility in these games is a big deal for me. And so I cannot suffer big, heavy, slow characters because it takes away that sense of, like, urgency from the game for me. So Hestu and I didn't really click, but I couldn't help but think, like, Hestu, as part of their combos, would summon other little Koroks to come fight with him. And I couldn't help but think at the time, I'm like, this is probably why they filled his maracas with their crap. Like, he would just summon them, and they're like, what? You're on a battlefield? God!
Yeah.
I'm going to take a dump in your maracas later.
Right. I didn't enjoy playing as Hestu at all, but I enjoyed the spectacle and the humor inherent in seeing all these, adorable little Koroks appear so quickly that their little just happens on loop over and over again, and it's just like
tossing all the random
it just makes for this comedic
enemies.
display of these cute little creatures laying waste to everything in front of you. But in terms of actually playing as him, I didn't enjoy it. I didn't enjoy it, but I love the comedic aspect of all the cute little over and over.
I love
again.
the tonal shift from, like, jubilation to disappointment in that last sentence.
Oh, I know, right? Yeah. But no, I enjoy the presentational aspect of Hestu and just the comedy aspect.
All right, Sidon as our next character, and I was like, oh, double spear, that's interesting. And I dug into his combat a bit more, and once you figure out the timings, which I didn't, it took me a little bit to realize, just hit the ZR button whenever there's a circle on screen. Boy, he can be devastating. And I love his shark theme, and boy, I kind of forgot how big Sidon was. Like,
Me too.
Huge.
Seeing them side by side, Sidon and Mipha, I can't. He's like 4 times her size. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, it's crazy. I think he's my favorite of the new champions to play as.
Oh, I don't think he is far and away my favorite.
Yeah, that's
of the
true.
Descendants
He
to
is
play
the
as.
best.
And I love how the game describes his ZR mechanic. It is so perfect to him. It is the power of optimism. You can tap into the power of optimism to power up all your combos. And that's so Sidon in a nutshell. And I really enjoy playing as this character. Not as much as Mipha, but he is easily my favorite of the Descendants, and just a really fun character to play.
Yeah, I could agree with everything the two of you said. Like, I feel like Sidon is the only one that I really cared about in terms of this group. Like, I mean, we'll get into the other ones later, but I don't think any of them are nearly as remarkable as Sidon is as a character. I think mechanically, yeah, he works, in my estimation, better than all the new ones. But I'm with you, Ash. He doesn't quite top. Well, he definitely doesn't come close to topping Mipha, and I still like Urbosa far better than I like Sidon in terms of playing as a character in the game, and both Urbosa and Mipha take a backseat to Link for me. So he's probably near the top. I would say character number 5 or maybe somewhere around there that I would go to. But honestly, I think one thing that these characters suffered for is how late they're introduced into the game, because at that point I've already established a rhythm of, like, here's who I use for this type of objective, here's who I use for these, and then I got these 4 new guys, and I'm like, oh well, I'm kind of already in the groove here, I don't need more help. So I didn't play as them nearly as much as I would have if they were introduced like a chapter earlier.
Right.
All right, well, what'd you guys feel about Yunobo? Because again, didn't quite click with me at first until I kind of figured out his whole eating mechanic. But even then, the combos aren't that great. So
Yunobo is the trifecta of things I don't like about a character. He is just big, heavy, slow. Like in terms of just, he is an inferior version of a character I'm already not into. And his design sucks. Like, I mean, and that's not Koei Tecmo's fault, but good Lord, I cannot stand to look. He looks like a big baby. Like,
yeah, he does.
The AOC version of Kiddy Kong.
Oh God,
man, that is a really great way to put it. There's just something off-putting about looking at Yunobo, and I can't take it. I'm like, get out of here, dude. Just Get a different haircut at least. Grow a beard, something.
There was a short time where I thought that I enjoyed playing as Yunobo more than Derrick, such as that even means anything. And no, I don't. I still prefer playing Derrick. This game did make me appreciate Yunobo as a character more. He's like, I felt like he got a little more time to kind of show us who he is, and I like that he's like that kind of, walk soft and kind of a big softy kind of guy compared to the really big gruff and overpowering Derrick. But at the same time, I don't think it translated into a very fun moveset. And he's probably among my least favorite characters to play.
Yeah.
Teba. And I thought, like, with him not being in the air as much as Rivali's, like, I thought I'd like Teba a lot more. I don't like how you get locked into his endless arrows. It just drags things to a halt. He feels so limited in where you can go and what you can do. I actually ended up liking him less than Rivali. Like, I thought I like him more because of the style, and I just don't click with him.
Rivali is like a bargain bin Falco, and Teba is like a bargain bin Rivali. Like it's
Ouch.
Just
oh man,
gets progressively worse. So I did not like. I think I played Teba one time, and I was like, nah, never again. Like I'm not doing this to myself.
I'm going to be the lone voice of dissent here. I actually enjoyed playing as Teba more than Rivali, and it's actually for the same exact reasons you didn't like Teba as much, Derrick, and that is that he is locked to the ground a little more, which to me kind of reins in his moveset a little bit and makes me able to do more consistent things with him. Like, I actually didn't mind being locked in place using arrows because depending on which combo you're using, those arrows will tear through mobs and weak point gauges for that matter. So I felt like maybe he's a little less dynamic to play as and maybe like a little less mobile, but I felt like I was able to get more done with him, more consecutively and more consistently. And so for that reason, I just enjoyed actually playing as him more. But you're right, he is locked to the ground more, and he's not as maybe creatively minded in his moveset as Rivali is.
All right, Riju. This is the paramount of a character I wanted to like,
Same.
but just did not click because I love Riju in the original. She's a lot of fun.
Yeah,
but the constant motion of her attack style, screws with the camera so much. It feels like compared to everything else.
She's too mobile.
It's so hard to tell what's going on, what you're doing, and figuring out the combos. And there's some cool ones in there, like the lightning coming out. I appreciate the one where the two Gerudo come out and do a big slash. That one's kind of fun, but that's like the only one that does it. And it's just too chaotic for me. I just didn't click with her.
Yeah.
Same.
I agree. She felt to me like I was reminded of how Miyamoto once said that like he intentionally made Luigi feel like slippery and out of control when you play as him in some of the older Mario games. And I was like, why do people design characters like this? Like, why do they design characters that are intentionally difficult to move around? And I feel like Riju, just with the amount she moves during normal combat, I never felt like I had a sense that I was attacking what I wanted to attack, and that is just incredibly frustrating. And like you, Derrick, I love her in Breath of the Wild. I was hyped when she became available because I'm like, she's one of my favorite characters. Like, I love this like little queen of the Gerudo. Like she is such a cool character, and they could have made her so cool. And the funny thing is that, unlike most of the descendants, I think she stands out the most from the person she's related to. She is very different from Urbosa by nature, and they could have given her a very different bend on her combat abilities, but the way they went about it just feels bad. Like, it doesn't feel natural to the character whatsoever.
It's funny. I actually feel like I would say, even though I don't really enjoy playing as her for all the reasons you guys already stated, I feel like they did a pretty good job capturing what makes Riju, and that is Patricia and her love of sand seals, right? I mean,
I don't.
The fact that her whole combat,
the style
like
makes
it feels
sense.
like it feels like what a sand seal combatant might actually play like, with the addition of really badass lightning attacks. And she does have some really cool attacks, but I agree with you guys in the sense that I just never felt like I was attacking who I wanted to. She was a bit too mobile and chaotic for me. Although I haven't watched videos, I don't doubt that maybe there's some really crazy stuff you can do at high level Riju play. I'd love to actually check that out. But I think my favorite thing about Riju is just the way she was portrayed in the story and how much she is different from Urbosa. And I love that when Patricia is introduced, they all get their little title, the best sand seal. I love how that's Patricia.
Yeah.
It's like the best sand seal. That was so good.
All right. Next up is Master Koga. A bit of a surprise pick here, and here's our silly character, which kind of works. Like, he can be very effective if you know how to manage his stuff, but it's also one of those things like I just don't find myself having fun playing with him that much.
Same.
It's like, I get it. There's some cool things here, but just let me bash things. I don't know.
I mean,
Yeah.
oh, he was introduced again so incredibly late in the game, and he's not a character that I was hyped to be able to play as. Like, I was like, I want to play an overweight Yiga? Like, this doesn't make any sense. Like, it just,
he's comic relief.
Nothing about him appealed to me. It was unfortunate, but
I mean, the whole thing about eating bananas to reduce the stress meter, it's cute and it makes sense for his character. I just didn't find him very fun to play, not streamlined enough for me, I guess. And also, like, this might just be my own bias. I didn't really like Koga in Breath of the Wild either, just because I felt like what had up to that point, the Yiga had been painted as these really brutal, really evil, fringe, splintered off clan of the Sheikah. Like, they felt like they were really out for Link and Zelda's blood, man. Like, they were evil. And then you get their leader, and he's just like kind of like this bumbling Wario-esque, just kind of like, he's kind of dumb. I mean, maybe, and I guess the whole thing is he's not actually dumb. He's actually really smart. He's actually a good strategist and tactician and combatant, but he's just too goofy for me, because it undermined to me what the Yiga were all about.
Exactly. I was about to say, if the group he was in charge of was not as, frankly, cool as the Yiga, then he would have made a lot more sense. But you expect to meet the leader of this clan who's like all over Hyrule, disguised as ordinary citizens, out to kill you, as like a serious badass. Like, you would want somebody who is just more serious to lead a group like that, especially one that can keep the Sheikah clan like on their toes. And it just doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel like a good fit. But more importantly, in the context of this game, like, if you're going to reveal him as a playable character, I feel like it should be way earlier, because there's no hype around getting this guy. Like, I was like, I was like, that's
Master interesting, Yiga, especially when you have the really cool second in command, and like, I want him.
What was his name?
Suga.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know what's funny?
He was cool. Like, I was like, why wasn't he the lead?
He should be. Yeah.
And there's rumors the data mine that he might be DLC. It's possible. We'll see. But But
ironically, it's funny, for such a throwaway character who wasn't that memorable, I feel like Burn from Spirit Tracks would have been like a perfect figured like the type of character to be the leader of the Yiga. Like, he seemed like he would be a good Yiga leader, given just what he was all about. But Koga just
Well, thankfully they redeemed themselves because the next character is King Rhoam, and I'm sorry, King Rhoam might be even better than Mipha once you have a grasp.
He's awesome,
because you can chain his attacks like crazy. I did such a long combo of attack, do this special, switch to his other form, do that other one, take the axe back, attack,
so
back
cool.
and forth, just mowing through the enemies the first time I played him, and it was freaking amazing. King Rhoam might be the MVP of this game.
Dude's a badass. Yeah, Mipha is still my number one favorite in terms of playable characters, but Rhoam is number 2 or 3. Like, he competes with Urbosa, and he's just what a creative moveset that perfectly captures what he was all about in Breath of the Wild for the short time that you see him, in terms of being the woodcutter and the king, and going between those two disguises and having an axe and a broadsword, and he's just such an overwhelmingly powerful presence on the battlefield, and that's what he should be. He's the king of Hyrule, and I gotta say, like, perhaps more than most other characters, I think Age of Calamity did Rhoam a lot of favors by making him an interesting character and showing us more about what he was about and why he was so. We knew why he was hard on Zelda, but he just in Breath of the Wild, but he just kind of came off as an asshole in that game. And in this game, you can see that there's genuine love and concern behind it, even though maybe he did go too far by taking away Terraco and such. But he's a more sympathetic character, but you can feel how powerful he is when you play as him. And he has these cool quips too, like, "Oh, one cannot help but smile." Like, you just laid waste to like thousands of enemies, man, and you're just talking about smiling. I love it.
Yeah, I was surprised by how fast King Rhoam is.
Yeah.
Like, I expected, again, just based on appearances, like a slow, lumbering character. That ain't it. This dude is fast, and he can crowd control like no other with either weapon. Like, both the axe and the sword, he swings them incredibly quickly, and like even his simple combos can just chew people up. Like, I was deeply surprised by how well fleshed out of a character he is in combat. Like, I did not expect this from a dude that appeared to have been taken out by one guardian. Like,
Right.
it was, I thought he was going to be a kind of just a slot filler, but he is one of the best characters in the whole game. Like,
Yeah. And you can see why he's a respected monarch. Like, you get that sense that, oh, this is why the Hyrulean army respects him, and this is why he's the leader. He's out in the front lines. He's a powerful warrior. He's not just sitting back on his throne being frail.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I don't know that I'd want to play as him in a mainline Zelda, but damn, they make a good case for all of these characters being in an action game. Like, again, this is another character that I could see being really satisfying to have a game centered around them, like
or even just a character
like
in Smash. Like, that'd be an odd one, but yeah, him in Smash would actually work really well.
Even just his default stance reminds you of how buff he is, because he's carrying this giant broadsword, and he just runs around the battlefield with it above his head, and so you're always reminded just how buff this guy is. He's so powerful. I love it.
Yeah. The only thing that I find weird is that he actually switches outfits when he switches forms. Like, why? Is it really necessary?
That makes it cooler.
I get the reference, obviously, but he was also dead when he was the woodcutter.
True. So. Oh, well. Well, next up, the first unlockable, like, through challenges that you could totally miss during the main game, the Great Fairies. Ugh, I hate the Great Fairies. They suck. They are too big, too unwieldy. It's just a mess. Like, I appreciate the idea, but they suck. These are my least favorite characters in the game.
It's funny. I don't enjoy playing as them, for sure. And they're too big and too clunky, but I love the comedic value and the creativity we see in their movesets. I love their voice clips. I find them a lot more fun to play as than Yunobo. I'll tell you that much. I'll take the Great Fairies over Yunobo every day.
Oh no, I'll take Yunobo over the Great Fairies because I can actually be effective with Yunobo. I feel so ineffective as the Great Fairies. It's just, ugh.
Yeah, I'm looking. So I didn't unlock the Great Fairies specifically because I heard bad things about them. So I'm watching gameplay right now. And I gotta say, I don't like what I see at all.
No, they're not good.
For the most part, like, I hate the fact that they're still in their flowers. Like, I mean, they're magical divine beings. Like, they can't just have legs.
Well, they're portaling in and out, so they can switch between the four of them and be all, each one has something unique to them.
Yeah, I see that now, but all it comes off as is weird.
I do like that they have their own different unique abilities. Like, they're a very diverse, very broad character to kind of reckon with, and I like that they represent something unique and completely alternative to anything else in the game. But I agree, I'm not good with them. But I don't know. I enjoy the visual pizzazz and just kind of the comedic factor. I find them at least more rewarding than someone like Yunobo again. But they're definitely on the lower end of my favorite characters or least favorite characters.
Well,
I can understand that.
Yeah. Next up is Monk Maz Koshia. Another bit of a surprise there, and I liked him way more. I've only played with him once or twice, but the times I did play with him, I was like, this is a fun character. This is pretty fun. I don't have enough to like properly rank him, but he'd be in the top half just because bringing out all the guardian weapons and can actually grow in size and stomp across the battlefield. There's some fun ideas with Koshia, and I dug him.
For me, Maz Koshia was like the opposite of what King Rhoam represented. Like, King Rhoam was a character I didn't expect to give a crap about and just thought I just wouldn't even pay attention to. And then I ended up loving him, and holy crap, he's cool. Then there's Maz Koshia, who, given, when you fight him in Breath of the Wild's DLC, and it's such an amazing, memorable boss fight, I was thinking, oh, I'm going to love this character. What a cool idea. Hell yeah. But I kind of bounced off him. I never really enjoyed playing Maz Koshia as much as I felt like I should. And maybe there's still something I'm missing, but I gave him quite a few shots, and it just didn't do it for me. I can't quite put my finger on why, though.
Steve, I guess you didn't unlock him.
I'm looking at the moveset here for Maz Koshia, and I actually think it looks pretty cool so far. Like I'm actually watching this and I'm thinking, damn, like this is a good reason to go back and unlock this character because the moveset to me, like it looks like they use what may or may not be ancient weapons, like blades that look like they're made of energy or something, and then he can turn into like a ball of blue energy, change size. Instead of running, he kind of sits cross-legged and floats around the field. I would say that's probably my least favorite thing about him, just because it looks weird. It looks almost as though it's like a mod without complete animation.
You also have Mipha swimming through the air when she runs, so...
Well, yeah, I'm just saying, like, when I watch this, the impression I get is like, oh, they didn't finish the animations for this one. At least for Mipha, I'm like, oh, well, it looks like an unevenly applied animation. But then I just watched like a weak point smash, I think, and he turned huge and then like stomped the ground and sent moblins flying everywhere, which I think is really cool. I gotta admit, I like this character a lot. I'm really feeling like the need to go back and get this character and figure out if they're as cool as they look on video. I mean, seeing someone play him and actually playing him is definitely two different things, but I like what I see.
Yeah.
I definitely feel like there's something I'm missing that I need to like go back and maybe give him another shot, because I just feel like he's cool. He's Maz Koshia, but yeah. Although I will say I liked his side quests in the sense of the way his side quests were presented as trials, essentially like shrine trials. That was cool. That's neat.
That was pretty cool.
Yeah.
Well, the last two characters are two that neither Steve nor I have checked out. I'm not going to watch any video, so I'm just going to take your word for it. Ash, what did you think of Terraco and Calamity Ganon? You said before that Calamity Ganon is not great.
Yeah, so I'll take them in order of unlocks. So Terraco is exactly as fun as you would imagine Terraco to be. They zip around and do all these cute little things, but then, as you're making these cute little beeps and such, Terraco will bring out these giant blades and do all these cool things. Terraco's special attack is a giant laser. Like, think Rob's Final Smash and Smash. God. It's like giant laser that's like several times as huge or as big as Terraco itself is. And I will say that I'm not quite as consistent with Terraco as I would like to be. I definitely like its ZR attack is a laser. You can shoot lasers whenever you want as Terraco. Oh, nice. And its lasers do different things depending on what combos you're using and what's in play and stuff. And so it's a really creative moveset, and I love playing as Terraco. I just want to get better because I'm not quite as consistent as I feel like I should be. But I think you both will enjoy playing as Terraco. He's a lot of fun and definitely a completely unique moveset, as you would think.
Nice.
Calamity Ganon, on the other hand, I don't know what I'm missing. Maybe I need to go back.
Is he normal size?
He's huge. I mean, he's
definitely. So it's a great fairy issue.
I don't think he's quite as big as he is when you fight him. I could be wrong about that, but and he feels more mobile than the Great Fairies. Don't get me wrong. He definitely feels powerful, but his combos just never felt like they should be as strong as the damage they weren't as strong as I felt like they should be in terms of damage I was doing. And he has this mechanic where you have a malice meter, and the moves that he does, they spread malice, and you can press, I think it's ZR, to absorb the malice, and then when his meter is full, you go into like malice mode, whatever you want to call it. It makes him more powerful. But it just kind of felt like a disappointing final playable character. I never felt, even though visually he looks powerful, I never felt as powerful as I felt like I should playing as Calamity Ganon, like a true force of nature. So, not my thing. I will admit I didn't play as him that much, but I gave him a few shots, and it just never, after unlocking some combos with him, and it just never quite came together for me. But Terraco, hell yeah.
I gotta admit, I'm watching Terraco's moveset right now, And Terraco's remote bomb is ridiculously cool.
It is, right?
He
so
shoots
cool.
like 4 bombs out of his head and then lasers them in midair.
Oh, that's
so they
awesome.
explode. I get the feeling, and I haven't looked at Calamity Ganon at all yet, but I get the feeling that Terraco seems like it would have been an excellent final character.
I think so. I think so.
Just based on what
I thought
I've
that
seen
was
in
going to be
moveset,
the
but
final character, honestly.
I do have a question for you, though, Ash, since you're the only one that's 100%ed it. I mean, is there any value to even playing the game after 100%? Like, is there anything worth doing left?
Well, I think to get 100%, you have to do Terraco and Calamity Ganon. And then all their stuff.
But I mean, but if you don't care about, like, if you don't care about actually getting 100% and just what the most compelling content is, yes, I would argue that once you get Terraco, you can essentially stop looking forward to anything cooler than that. I mean, and then it just becomes about if you enjoy the game enough, just playing it in bits and spurts like I did, then you just want to get 100% naturally because you enjoy time spent with the game. But I do agree that once you unlock Terraco, that's like the height of it. That's, once it's kind of like Mario Odyssey. Once you get 500 moons, you get to the darker side of the moon, there is no reason to get 999 moons because that sucks. That experience sucks.
Yeah.
I did that.
I did too, and I regret it to this day.
I haven't done
I
it,
absolutely
so.
regret it. Yeah. So it is kind of like that. Terraco to me, and I guess to some other people, Calamity Ganon might be the coolest thing, but for me personally, he felt like a disappointment, like a letdown compared to Terraco.
All right.
All right,
Well,
fair enough.
We've covered quite a bit of the game, but so I think we're going to wrap up here soon. But is there anything we haven't really covered? I have a feeling, we haven't covered the music yet for Ash. So,
Right.
Obviously we can jump into the music for you, Ash. But if there's anything else you wanted to talk about quick as well, Steve, that we haven't really covered.
I feel like we've got it pretty well covered. I mean, I've
Same.
given probably as extensive thoughts as I'm able to give on this game now. But I will say that hearing both you and Ash, who have gone further with the game than I did, even though I did beat it, has got me kind of wanting to come back and run a few more missions and see if I can't unlock Terraco specifically. Because it does look like there is some good post-game content here that is worth checking out.
Oh, there definitely is.
Yeah. I'd argue that there definitely is. The one thing I completely forgot to bring up is our Divine Beast stages, and I think that I think that speaks to the fact that they're really not that memorable. And if you play with the motion controls, they suck. They like the aiming really sucks. Like, it's cool to have that power fantasy, but I don't do it that often.
I mean,
it's just
the Switch was not prepared for something like that. Like, battles of that magnitude are not well suited. Like, the game itself on the ground is not super well suited to the level of hardware it's running on, as we've mentioned.
Right.
But then when you zoom it out and you have like an actual divine beast, and they do, and I think it's still the same, probably lower poly, but there's still tons of enemies all over the place.
Yeah.
And the Switch has such a hard time keeping up with this, and it looks bad to begin with. Like, the environments are really low on detail. And like you said, Derrick, they default to those damn motion controls, and they're so bad. Like, they're not, like, I always wonder, because any game of this magnitude goes through tons of testing and tons of different people trying it. And I wonder how many people are like, yo, these motion controls are just, because I don't know how that, like, someone goes, nope, that's it. Ship it with those as the default. Like, this is the best version of the experience. Because I don't know anybody who likes who prefers those motion controls to just aiming with an analog stick in this game. The motion controls in AOC are bad across the board.
Yeah, I like what they were going for with the Divine Beast battles, like you were saying, Derrick, power fantasy, and there is some of that comes through. Like, especially, I'm thinking with Va Meadow, like the attacks you can do, like the lasers that just like tear across the screen in front of you and everything blows up. That power fantasy does come through, and I do enjoy that part of it. But in terms of just the moment to moment gameplay, it's too clunky, and the motion controls are not good. So I appreciate what they were going for, and I think, given more powerful hardware, it could actually be really cool, these Divine Beast stages. But as they exist in the game now, again, I like the concept, and I think they got closer than the Switch hardware probably should have been allowed them to, but it still isn't enough. And but I'm glad they're there. Like, I don't think they could have, You could have had the game without them, but I think it's important for the context of the story to have those missions in the game and let you play as divine beasts. So
show off
I like that they're there. Yeah. But yeah, then I guess just to touch on the music really quick, I mentioned this on Twitter a few days ago, but I was so utterly delighted and surprised by this soundtrack because, based on the Musou games I played, Hyrule Warriors OG and Fire Emblem Warriors, it's, those games had Zelda and Fire Emblem songs run through the usual Koei Tecmo butt rock filter. And there's nothing wrong with that. I enjoyed those soundtracks for what they were.
I like the soundtrack of Hyrule Warriors. Yeah. It's fun.
Yeah, the original Hyrule soundtrack is actually quite good, but this was not that at all. This was, to my mind, the Breath of the Wild, like the traditional Breath of the Wild soundtrack we never got. Because Breath of the Wild, obviously it was an open world atmospheric game. And so you had atmospheric music and most of the time no music to go along with it. And that works for that game. But we were also deprived of a traditional Zelda soundtrack for Breath of the Wild. And Age of Calamity is that soundtrack. And it's so good. There's so many standout tracks. And when I realized I was hearing, I was in for something special, was the first Rivali mission, where you hear Rivali's theme remixed for Age of Calamity, and I'm like,
so good.
This is really good. And then you have those two missions where you have to save the champions. Both of those songs are great, and I think one of them is the one where you hear they incorporate the Hyrule Castle theme from A Link to the Past in it, and it's so good. What a great soundtrack, and I was so happy to be pleasantly surprised by this. And even just the menu theme. You have the regular menu theme before Calamity Ganon attacks, and then you have the dark, messed up version of the menu theme, and then you beat the game, and you have this really nice, serene, peaceful, hopeful version of the menu theme that also incorporates Zelda's theme into it. It's a really good soundtrack, and it was one of the standout surprise elements for me of this game.
It's a highlight. It's absolutely a highlight.
Yeah.
And I mentioned the same thing as you were. It really does feel like this is the soundtrack Breath of the Wild would have had if it was more traditional.
Exactly.
So, yeah, I think that covers it for our Age of Calamity review discussion. So, thank you all for watching. And if you enjoyed this video, please consider supporting us on Patreon at patreon.com/gvgaming. But even just subscribing to the channel and ringing that bell helps us a ton. So thank you all once again. And until next time, bye.
Bye, everybody.